you really have to look into this specific thing. So Andrea Biasiucci helped us in creating this with, he is part of Confinis, and gave a tremendous work and basically packaged for us a beautiful panel that we're able to propose today to all of you. I'm gonna let Leo introduce the first speaker for today.
Yeah. Hi everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Viky Verna. He holds a biomedical engineering degree from the University of Miami, as well as 2 masters, one in biomedical engineering and one in pharmacology. He occupied different positions at the FDA, including Consumer Safety Officer, Compliance Officer, and Acting Branch Chief. He is a regulatory consultant at Medical Human Factors, advising on medical device regulations. And finally, he is co-founder and vice president of Confinis, a global consulting firm in the field of medical device. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Leo. And I think Marco described it pretty well. We had to put this like pretty fast, so I apologize ahead of time if there's some shakiness going on here, because I had to put up these slides pretty fast within a day or so. So let me go ahead and share my presentation. Can you guys see the presentation? Any sign? Perfect. All right. So I'll be talking about FDA regulations or regulatory oversight in general on artificial intelligence and in digital health. I know the topic is neuroprosthetics and so forth, but I think we will see some correlation there in how the application can be. Are you guys seeing the full screen, or is it showing?
Yes, we're seeing full screen.
Okay, so not the computer. Okay, sorry about that. Because on my side, it's not moving. All right. Okay. So for the agenda, I'll quickly go over some general concepts. I'll try to keep this presentation pretty broad. And then for some, go over the potential applications, benefits as the background information, and then get straight to the regulatory oversight at a very high level by covering some of the guidance documents until we get to the discussion paper from the FDA regarding AI and in digital health. So Leo already went over my background, but I have a master's in biomedical engineering, a master's in pharmacy, a couple of drug regulatory affairs certificates, over 12 years of experience in the industry, and worked at the FDA for about 7 years. And as part of my journey at the FDA, I did get to review a lot of different neuro products, and especially when I was in a branch that was called RAND, for radiology, anesthesiology, and neurology devices. There, I did get to see a couple of DCIs, and I also worked on a lot of neurostimulator or stimulating devices and so forth. So just to jump into it, if you're dealing in the regulatory world, you're going to hear a lot about digital health, and so we'll try to go over some of those common terms. So for example, for digital health, it is just a broad term just to cover most of the different medical devices that use digital technologies. And then some of the common ones are like mobile health, like the wearable devices, telehealth, telemedicines, and especially those that are intended for personalized medicine and treatment. So, and you will also hear a lot about software as a medical device. This is actually a more global term or global terminology. And it is actually defined by the International Medical Device Regulators Forum as a software intended to be used for one or more medical purposes that perform these purposes without being part of a hardware medical device per se. And now to get into the topic, it is the artificial intelligence is not necessarily defined by the FDA itself, but it is understood as a science or engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computers, and that was from McCarty in 2007. And machine learning is an artificial intelligence technique that uses algorithm to learn from and act on data. And this can be a locked approach or an adaptive approach based on the general understanding of machine learning. But what makes it a cool thing here, and I know we've discussed about AI here in this conference for many of the different applications, but what differentiates it here from a regulatory standpoint, especially from the traditional software as a medical device, is its potential to adapt and optimize in real time to continuously improve a device's performance, for example. And this is a key point because this is also what brings in the potential benefits. While I know that this program is for neuro, but in this slide, just to provide some potential applications, you can think of an ECG, for example, that can estimate the probability of a heart attack, for example. So that could be a great benefit in preventing some deaths there, or serious adverse events, or even just a regular imaging system that can use AI to to better diagnose skin cancer, for example. And I'm sure based on some of the examples that we heard earlier, can showcase how AI can be used in neuroprosthetics as well. So these are just some general benefits, but in general, we know that AI can help advance medical care in general, whether it's through personalized treatment or reducing pain or just reducing cost of healthcare in general. And this brings us to FDA's mission. As we know, FDA is responsible for advancing the public health by speeding innovations and then by ensuring that medical products are effective, safe, and affordable. At least that's the mission that they try to go for. However, unfortunately, when we're talking about AI and machine learning, the traditional regulatory approaches are not necessarily effective or adapted to control AI and machine learning based medical devices. So technically, as of right now, there's not an established framework to regulate AI and machine learning. However, they did recently publish a discussion paper to basically communicate their intent of establishing a framework where they would be able to allow products to have to be able to make modifications in real time and adapt while still keeping those products safe and effective. So it's still on the go, but at least given the opportunities with AI in AI-based products, FDA is already starting to consider those. So just so that you can understand where we're coming from with this AI topic, it's probably good for us to quickly go over FDA's general approach or FDA's regulatory approach in general. So FDA covers basically all type of medical products, from devices, pharmaceuticals, and as well as even food. And here we're going to be focusing more at the Center for Devices in Radiological Health, so, which is the center that takes care of medical devices. And just to speed it up, the general understanding for medical device oversight on products is that it's based on a risk-based approach for where they have a classification system where class 1 devices or those that are with lower risk, and then class 2, which is the highest level, or for the products that deal with higher risk situations. And then the approval process to get into market can be either based on a 510K, which is associated primarily with the class 2 level, so basically moderate risk products, and PMAs that go for class 3, which are the highest risk products. So if we're considering most of the neuroprosthetics, usually they fall under the class 3 levels, especially if they're implants and so forth. But there could be several products that could also fall under the class 1, class 2 level, going with the 510K approach, which is the most common and most popular route. So for this, it is important for you guys to understand also the definition of a medical device. So without going through all of these, all of the wordings here, what you have to understand here is that a medical device is technically a product that is intended for diagnosing or curing, mitigating, treatment, or in preventing a disease. So that's the gist of the definition here, especially when it does not achieve its primary intended purpose through chemical action. And this is important because that's what differentiates a medical device from a drug. Okay, so now, while we know the definition of a medical device, there in 2017, as more regulations and regulatory frameworks have been getting defined for software-based products, there was a change into the regulation that allowed, where there were some clarifications that were made to exclude some software products from the definition. And to understand the importance of this is that now it makes it more clear for the industry to understand how some of the products that they're developing will be regulated. So if it is a medical device, then FDA will regulate it and regulate it at the levels that is appropriate. So if it is class 1, at lower risk, but if it is a class 3, then the level of scrutiny will be pretty intense. So here, this excludes several products that would fall under the software medical device realm, whenever they would meet those requirements. For example, if they're intended for administrative support, if it is a product that is just intended to help maintain and encourage healthy lifestyle, want to serve as an electronic patient records instead of paper-based patient records, or just intended to transfer, store, or converting or displaying data. Usually these are not necessarily considered as medical devices, especially for that last one, if they're providing recommendations. But the caveat here is that it has to be providing recommendations, but not necessarily, but by allowing the user to independently review the data or the basis of that recommendation. So it's not necessarily making the decision for the user. And if that is the case, then it's not a medical device. All right, so to speed it up a little bit more, so what I'll do, there are a couple of, for the past, I would say 4 or 5 years, that's when most of the guidance documents, which are the documents that FDA publishes so that it can basically communicate how it intends on enforcing some of the regulations. So this is like a very important tool on how the industry can understand how their products will be regulated. So as we're talking about software and AI and all of this, it's probably going to be a good idea to know about these guidance documents. So there's one about mobile medical apps, and this one basically describes which mobile medical apps meet the definition of the device, meaning which types of mobile medical apps would get regulated by the FDA, and depending on the risk, what level of scrutiny that you can expect. So if it falls within the medical device regulation definition, for example, if it is intended to be used as an accessory to an already regulated medical device, or if it transforms a platform into a regulated medical device. So that means you could have your iPhone, but your iPhone is not a medical device. But if the second that you install an application that is intended to perform device-based work, then it becomes a medical device. So this guidance document also describes how FDA plans on establishing or enforcing the requirements. And basically, at the end of the day, it's based on the intended use. Depending on what claims you make for your product, this will determine whether FDA will regulate it or not. So for example, there are 3 levels you can consider. One is the top level, where it's based on the intended use. It can be reviewed as a traditional medical device, or if it is considered a low-risk medical device, then FDA exercises something they call enforcement discretion, which means that they will not necessarily enforce compliance. So if you fall under this category, you may be under the radar, and FDA will not necessarily give you any issues. And if it is a non-medical app, in the guidance document, it provides instruction on how you can know whether your product is not even considered as a medical device, and then in that instance, it would not provide any, it will not necessarily even look at those, because they would not fall under FDA's jurisdictions. Another system is called the medical device data system. There are some of them that are also excluded from the device definitions, and I won't go through those, but it is the same concept as the mobile apps, but these are usually intended primarily for transferring and storing data. So the general, there's another guidance document for general wellness devices. And this one came out especially after all of the mobile app devices came out. And then especially when we're considering some of those Fitbits and those that are intended to basically promote healthy living. And for most of those, they're not considered medical device, but it depends on the claims that are made on the label, meaning that a Fitbit can end up being a medical device if they're intended, for example, if they're connected with a prosthetic, for example, which is probably possible. So I kind of, okay, here. So for some of the wearable technologies, and this also applies for many of the other products that we're discussing, as I have it here for the pre-submission meetings, if you have a product where you're unsure on how it's supposed to be regulated, you should definitely consider a pre-submission meeting, meaning that you are able to have a meeting with the FDA to discuss the technology that you're using, the intended use of your product, and then so that you can clarify and address any of the technical or document or technical evidence that needs to be generated. And when it comes to just identifying, like, let's say the classification of your product, like let's say whether it is regulated as a medical device or not, you can also submit something that is called a 513G application. It's not my favorite application, but it is an official route for you to get an insert from the FDA. So this is a table here just to compare what a general wellness device is in comparison to a regulated one. But as already described, the wellness devices are usually intended for health and wellness, very low risk, may or may not meet the definition of a device, but usually you're based on well understood claims for healthy lifestyle choices. Meanwhile, a regulated medical device is usually intended for a specific medical purpose. It can range from low to high risk, meets the definition of a medical device, and usually a manufacturer of any of these software systems need to provide evidence of evidence on the performance of the product to basically substantiate it. Be going a little bit faster. Then there's the interoperable medical devices and cybersecurity guidance documents. There are tons of cybersecurity guidance documents that you should probably look into. I mean, there are about 3 or 4 or 5, but the guidance documents for interoperable medical devices, it's for those devices, even for the previous presentation that we had, where there are some software activities happening on one side, but then you have another device in another side where they have to either communicate wirelessly or so. These would be considered interoperable medical devices. And there are guidance documents that describe what needs to be considered for the different interfaces, for the development and design process, of the type of testing and verification activities that need to be performed, and the type of risk mitigation features that should be considered, especially when it comes to cyber security. And it also provides clarification.
We might have a question for a student if you find like 2 minutes we can ask and before the next talk. Okay,
no problem. And then this guidance document also covers the pre-market submissions, like the content that needs to be in the pre-market submission. So meaning what needs to be in the application that gets submitted to the FDA. So I already went over those for the cybersecurity, software modifications. Okay, so in general, software modifications, changes to a product in general may require a new 510K. But this guidance clarifies what type of changes do not require a new 510K, which is a hassle. Okay. And then the last one is about guidance documents for clinical decision support, but we kind of touched on that previously. So these are for products or software products where they help make decisions, but they're not making the decisions for the user. And now that leads us to the discussion paper for AI. So while there's not an actual framework, as we can see, there are several guidance documents that are out there for software-based products. But now, as I described earlier in the presentation, there's a difference between the software as a medical device versus AI and machine learning-based software. And one of the main points here is that is the ability for AI to constantly and continuously adapt its the algorithm according to the data that it's receiving in according to the end goal. And this is where now FDA is starting to develop a framework to be able to take in consideration the anticipated modifications based on the AI algorithm. And then for there, they're referring to that term called as software as a medical device pre-specification. So basically being able to know ahead of time what can change based on the AI algorithm, and also a risk-based control system to allow and facilitate and allow the changes that can happen in a way that can assure that the safety and effectiveness of the product. So the key points here is that the AI and ML specific regulatory framework has not yet been established. There are guidance documents that are out there to cover some of the gaps, but while this is there, there's still a lot to be learned. And this is why we can expect a lot of additional guidance documents to come out. And because the benefits are known, FDA is very interested in knowing more about these type of products that you guys are working on. And this is why they also came out with the FDA pre-cert program. So if you're in a program where you have AI being used in your neuroprosthetic products, FDA might already want to know about it, and that's where we would recommend engaging with the FDA early on. And if you can join this program, this can be a good way for them to continue shaping that framework. So whether it is for the future of using AI in neuroprosthetics or in that field, or just to know exactly how your product will be regulated, discussing with FDA early on is strongly recommended. So,
Thank you.
sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Viky Verna. And there is a very interesting question, but we'll keep that for the beginning of the round table, because actually I think it applies across regulations. And I'm gonna give the microphone to Timothy, who is responsible to introduce our next guest. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. So I have the great pleasure to introduce today Martin Witte. Did I pronounce it properly? Martin received his engineering diploma from Hamburg University of Applied Sciences, specializing in biomedical and medical technology. He now works as the Global Director of Active, Implantable, and Cardiovascular Devices at TÜV SÜD in Munich, Germany. The company provides added value to partners and customers through a comprehensive portfolio of testing, certification, auditing, and advisory services in order to bring medical devices onto the European market. So once again, Martin, it is a great pleasure to have you with us today. The microphone is now yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm trying to share my screen. I think this should work easily. I'm not very used to Zoom because we are actually not really allowed to use it, but this is an exception. Good. Okay, and I have my remote control. So yeah, my talk will be about the MDR requirements, European requirements on medical devices. And if we are talking about novel technology, is something we all need to take into consideration, because at the end, an idea or a new technology only will provide its benefits when it's on the market. And I think EU with 500 million potential patients or users might be an interesting market for everyone. So let's start with a bit of background about the MDR. And the MDR is the new medical device regulation in Europe. And so basically in the early or in the late 10th of this century, the EU Commission decided they need a new legal framework around medical devices, as there were some issues in the early times of this century, because FDA also had these problems. There were, and I was starting working in regulatory back then, and there were some pacemaker leads, penetrating hearts, and there were some breast implants made of industry silicone. So all that nasty stuff that nobody really wanted. And in the end, what politicians can do is they can create laws. That's all they can do, but that's their product. So they decided they do a new regulation around medical devices. And it was actually proposed first in 2012, and then followed up several times. And it was supposed to start and becoming active and setting into force 26th of May of this year. However, something came in between. So due to the corona situation, the European Commission decided to postpone the date of application to May 2021. For some manufacturers or for some people working in this field, this seems to be a very good thing, because they have 1 year more time to collect data. And for you to get a better understanding on what needs to be provided in Europe, I will show you some slides on the following pages. And I want to take the definitions FDA is using on medical device more or less as being also applicable to Europe. There might be slight differences. However, we talk about the same thing, a medical device. It's not a pharmaceutical thing, but it could also be not a medical device that falls under the MDR. I'll come to that later. So mainly the MDR will impact manufacturers heavily. And these are 6 most important things that will change. So basically there is much more scrutiny on pre-market data, specifically on clinical data. That's a huge difference in between the old regulatory framework and the new one. And it's, I think, a big difference between the US and the EU. So I worked with both regulations on the industry side, and there were huge differences. Then there will be more control about over notified bodies, because there was a certain diversity in this market of notified bodies, and there are some areas where diversity is not really what you want, and the requirements of notified bodies is something you don't want to have too much diversity, because they are there to protect the people and to get safe and effective products on the market. And then there is an interesting thing that if your product is not a medical device, but is similar to a medical device, or can act like a medical device, it also falls under the MDR. And there is a very interesting example for that, and that's contact lenses. So if you wear contact lenses that make your eyes look like animal eyes for Halloween, or green colored ones, or I don't know, black, then these products in the EU will be treated like medical devices, even though there is no medical purpose of it. Background there is that for those devices, the same level of safety should apply. And there were some really unnice things happening in the past, where young people got blind because of using these fun contact lenses. And the EU decided that's something they don't want to see again. So then there will be a central database, and clinical data and clinical evidence is much more in focus, as well as active post-market surveillance on the product you are putting on the market. Now, we also have classification rules in Europe, and basically it's class 1, 2, and 3, but there is some middle or some in-between classes. So for example, there's class 1, 2A and class 2B, and there is a pseudo class, the class 2B implantables, and the class 3. The class 3 device is the most dangerous one, or the most risky one, whereas the class 1 device is a very low risk device typically. And the SMRSI stands for sterile, measuring function, or reusable surgical instrument. The higher the risk class, the more scrutiny is put onto the device and its conformity assessment. And actually this, I don't go through this in detail, but that's actually the routes you can take to get an EU CE certificate, or an allowance, so to say, to go onto the European market. It's always a connection of compliance to the so-called general safety and performance requirements, plus a technical documentation. And then it depends a bit on what risk class you have, which route you take. That's something for, I would say, an over 1 hour talk to go through all of this, so I'll skip this now. But I want to explain a little bit about the technical documentation. So the technical documentation is something where a manufacturer describes their product. So it starts with a device description for us as a notified body to understand what the device is about. Then there is information supplied by a manufacturer, which is typically IFUs, instruction for use, and labels, design and manufacturing information, and then these so-called general safety and performance requirements. And there is a full annex to the MDR with very high-level requirements on medical devices that need to be fulfilled by every medical device. As there are approximately 500,000 medical devices, these general safety and performance requirements need to fit to all of those devices. And that makes it sometimes challenging to fulfill all of those. Then there is risk management for sure, and verification and validation data. Now you might wonder, where's clinical here? Well, that's actually part of the verification and validation data. And clinical is becoming much more important now. So a clinical evaluation was always there. Now the requirement is there that first of all, every medical device needs to have a technical documentation as described in the previous slide. And there needs to be a clinical evaluation for each and every medical device. So a clinical evaluation is not a report or a thing you can submit, it's actually a process. And this graphic on the right side shows that the process is an interaction of several elements in the whole quality management system of a manufacturer. So, for example, you have PMS, which is post-market surveillance. You do your clinical evaluation. Maybe you search for literature about your device or your treatment option you're proposing. You create a clinical evaluation report. Then there is a technical documentation where this CER is in. Then there will be trend reporting, vigilance, risk management. It's a circle of clinical evaluation you're doing, and you have to repeat it over and over again to always have an understanding about your device, because other than in the US, in Europe, your market access will be limited to 5 years only. So after 5 years, you have to show that your device is still compliant to the general safety and performance requirements applicable in 5 years, not today. So you need to have a very strong post-market surveillance activity ongoing in your organization. Now, what about clinical data for high-risk devices? As I'm working in a field where it's always and only about high-risk medical devices, I will focus on these class 3 devices here. And the MDR is, in some places not too precise. However, it also needs to fit to 500,000 medical devices. So when it talks about that, the amount of clinical data you're providing for a device needs to be sufficient, then that's more or less what the MDR can tell you. Because you as a manufacturer or as an inventor, you know what the risks of your device are. You know the clinical application. You know best what patients might face and what patient population you have, what challenges are there. So the sufficient amount is something the manufacturer needs to define. And you are in a better situation if you really have people in your organization who can deal with clinical assessments, clinical studies, clinical evaluations, and also statistics. It needs to be collected for high-risk devices on the actual device. So under the current regulatory framework, it was possible to do something like looking for a similar device, looking at the clinical data of the similar device, and then you could place an argumentation why this clinical data of the other medical device is also applicable to your medical device. For high-risk devices under the MDR, this is no longer possible. And in general, this approach is very much eliminated by the MDR, because the medical device you have in focus might be slightly different or relatively huge differences to the actually existing other devices. So it's not that easy to transfer clinical data from other devices to your device. As I said, statistical basis is important, and you need to look at a rigid and very well planned post-market phase. And one of the elements there for high-risk devices is the post-market clinical follow-up, where you actually collect data of your device in actual clinical use. Yeah, I mean, you can do a clinical study, but that's still a test scenario. It's a study. It's a bit artificial still. Some things you might only observe in post-market clinical follow-ups. However, what is not okay is to say, yeah, I don't know what to look for. I will do everything in the post-market clinical follow-up phase. That's not acceptable. So you need to have sufficient clinical data in the first place. And maybe there are some questions that remain open, which you can only answer by collecting data over 2, 3, 5 years on a patient population of 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 patients, potentially. And for high-risk devices, if you provide your clinical evaluation to a notified body, we will assess it, but there will also be an expert committee at the EU level, which will also assess our assessment of the clinical evaluation, which puts another layer of scrutiny onto it. Yeah, so how do you know if you have sufficient clinical data or not? well, that's a huge, huge, huge challenge. And it's maybe the challenge everybody faces currently when they want to go to the European market under the MDR. And I know of a lot of manufacturers who were already on the market and who figured out that the clinical data they have is just not sufficient to comply with the MDR. Now, what you should do first is you should know, if you don't have one yet, who your notified body will be or is. Different to the FDA, notified bodies are not allowed to provide you with help or guidance. There is a rule in place that doesn't allow us to do any consultancy services. However, we are allowed to do assessments. In the end, that is a huge difference if we do an assessment or if we do provide you with guidance. So we are not allowed to provide you with any guidance. However, there is this expert group at EU level which will have a interface to provide their point of view on clinical data and if clinical data might be sufficient or what level of clinical data should be collected. However, that expert group is not a notified body. So you would only have one half of the portion, but not the notified body in the boat. So if you want to consult with the EU expert group, also make sure that you have a notified body already where you are able to discuss clinical. And then you need definitely to think about clinical data in a very, very early stage of your development. So whenever you have an idea of a medical device, you must make sure that you have clinical data, or you must make sure that you know what kind of clinical data you need to collect to show that the device is safe and effective. And do no longer believe in the equivalence route. That's something, just forget it. It was there, but for high-risk devices, and if we are talking about neuro and neurostimulation and neuroprosthetics, these are all high-risk devices. So better not to underestimate the burden there. And then there is also a certain amount of guidance documents coming from the EU. And very interestingly, I think last week or so, the MDCG guidance document 2020-13 was published, and it actually shows the public how a notified body assessment report on clinical evaluations should look like. If you take that and go through it, and you can make sure that you can answer or can provide data for all the questions asked in that report template, you are in a better position than ignoring this publication. Good, so actually you're almost done now. You can now start your ideas and yeah, you're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Actually, it's a very nice presentation, very, very fluid. It's easy to follow, even for like a layman as
Thank you.
There is a question from Antoine. Would you like to take the microphone?
Okay. Do I need to do something or?
No, I just wanted to check if Antoine is there. If he's not there, I'm gonna. Are you there?
Oh, do you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. Yes, good one. Yeah, my question was like for the clinical data collection, is there any problem if it was like published before, like for an open source data set, like, you know, like you acquired it, but you publish it, you made it available before going through the regularization?
No. So if you have data about your device, we as a notified body, we don't care if it was publicly available or not, because, and it's also something the MDR doesn't care about. It's important that you take into consideration all the clinical data you have. So vice versa, you wouldn't be allowed to ignore such data also in case it would be negative. Yeah, you must take it into consideration and justify maybe why negative data does not affect compliance.
We have a hot question from Andrea.
Hello, Martin. Thank you very much for this evening. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So the question that I have is, according to your experience, I mean, there are many researchers in this chat room right now in this space that may have initial pilot studies. They may have a great idea and see, for example, I have a brain reading machine, and I tested it on 5 people and this works. So what is, in your experience, the most common pitfall that you find with early stage projects and startups? And what is the advice you would give to researchers that are great technology? I mean, what can they do with their data to make it worth for later on?
Well, what I typically see or hear, and what I've also recognized once on a conference in Edinburgh was, yeah, I have 29 patients and this data is sufficient. And I'm really wondering then how 29 patients can be sufficient. And it's sometimes not really statistically justified why 29 is the right number. I don't say it must be 299 always. It must be statistically relevant. And this is very often underestimated. And what I also see very often is, I mean, yeah, and you have a great idea and then you want to try it out and it's all fine. However, in the end, your great idea will only fly if you have a foundation to build the business case around it. So, and you're dealing with human beings. So you need to be careful in what you're doing, and you should always plan your activities, because what comes out of your activities, you need to take into consideration. And if you have weak planning, the result will be bad or not high quality. And that's of course a challenge. However, whatever you collect is relevant for you, and that you shouldn't underestimate, because that's also what I see often, that companies say, yeah, we tried this out, but we ignored the data later, and that's not acceptable.
Francesco. Are you there?
Martin, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you also, Vicky, for the presentation. Actually, I was having in mind the question, I have many questions, but on top of all of them, I had a similar idea of the question that Andrea made, but on the after in the roadmap. So I'm wondering if there is a roadmap that you should follow for arriving to certification of this device. Why do companies always report that they fail to do so, that they miss something in the roadmap? I mean, what happens there? I don't understand.
Might be very easy. Companies work with human beings, and human beings make mistakes, and then it's always very difficult to really stand in for your mistakes. And then sometimes it's like, yeah, and then they figure out, oh, we missed it. I think this, I don't really know why that is, but I mean, I've seen a lot of stuff. Yeah, I've seen very, very critical things happening in organizations where you think that certain issues are under control, but it's a thing that lies somehow in human nature. And that's the reason why the systems need to be very strong, and that governance in organization needs to be also strong, and quality management is important. But yeah, I think this is more a human factor thing.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin Witte. We invite you to stay for the round table with Viky Verna and Andrea Biasiucci. Anthony, would you like to introduce Andrea?
Yeah. So I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Andrea, the Confinis cluster lead and senior consultant, to our virtual summer school. So, sorry? Yeah, so he's an engineer by heart. He is identified strongly in bringing out the missing particle for business. Our speaker spent almost his entire career advocating people on their quality management system. Being a problem solver, is also a co-founder for a startup called Intent to SA, which focuses on the development of a novel device that would promote motor recovery after stroke. He's going to talk about the regulatory affairs which would best ensure in the translation of high-tech research to successful products. So without further delay, I pass on the mic to Dr. Andrea. Thank you. And thanks, Marco.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anthony. So let me see if you can see my screen. Do you see anything? And do you see it full screen? Okay, good. So it's not full screen?
Not yet full screen.
Is it now?
Good.
Very good. So thank you very much. And it's great to be here. I have the high role to close this panels, and it's the last talk of this excellent summer school. I really enjoyed it. Thank you to all the organizers for putting together such great technology. We've seen a lot, and I think if I was a student, I would be super excited to be participate in such an event and see so much real world things. So I will talk about high-tech innovation. So we heard in this last panel a point of view from the FDA, a point of view from a notified body. I will bring in the point of view from a consulting agency that helps companies navigate these very complex routes that you've seen. So the company for which I work is called Confinis. We are a global consulting firm in combination products, medical device, and in vitro diagnostics. We are based in Switzerland, in the USA. And of course, when I speak about medical devices now, I include all the digital health, AI, and active implantable solutions that are very important in this, let's say, in these years of very high innovation technology. And we all talk every day about technology. So I think it's very important to show that even consulting agencies have a soul. So we do have values that we firmly believe in. And Confinis is a small, relatively small consulting agency. We could call a boutique consulting firm, meaning that we concentrate on very specific niche of products and high tech. And let's say that our values and all the people that work at Confinis share this vision, is that we want to bring a missing particle. You see our logo is, I think it's a good show of what we would like to bring into to our clients that are manufacturers of medical device and combination product and in vitro diagnostics. So bringing in some features, some set of features that is missing in a specific moment in time. And the ultimate goal and the ultimate vision of companies like us, and by our vision and mission, is to improve the life of patients. And because we work with humans, as it was said in previous presentations, and we work with humans that are needing help, and they are needing help with their health, and they are very fragile, and they're very they need to trust the technology that they get. And sometimes manufacturers, they may be driven by business reasoning, by any type of difficulty that can relate to the life of a company, and they may, let's say forget or neglect some very important aspects of safety and performance. So we are active there to provide best advices that always keep the health of and the safety of the patient as the most important value. So speaking of diversity, our field is a field where diversity is an excellent asset to provide, and it's probably the most important aspect that we can provide to clients. So we have a very diverse team. We are more than 35 people into the company, between full-time employees and freelancers that we can involve. Sometimes that there is a very specific question in a niche, we have a network of people we know that can answer this niche. 30% of women. That's for this field is a relatively good measure. The company has made let's say a celebration this year of 15 years in business, with its Swiss location and its USA location in Washington. We've been working with many devices, as you may imagine. In these 15 years, we've seen more than 100 combination products, more than 1,000 medical devices entering the market through with our help. I want to take all the credit for that. And we've been serving all around the globe. 15 nationalities among our employees and 16 languages spoken. So that's a small global company. So in general, let's say the profile of people that work in regulatory consulting are people that have several years of experience in very specific niche topics. This can be in corporate, it can be FDA. We heard Vicky speaking before. We can have also experience in notified bodies like lead auditors and other roles in notified bodies. And the important thing is that we work together so that when a question comes from a manufacturer, we can consult internally to a company, find the know-how and the answer that is reliable and reputable, and come back to our clients. In the recent years, to serve this emerging market of technology, the company has been hiring more and more people with an academic background, and I am one of those. So I have an academic background, and I'm also a startup founder. I founded a startup in 2012 and made an exit. So I will show you in a moment. I think it's nice for students to also see this side of the world and to get an idea about that. So what does it look like to make regulatory affairs in high-tech fields for medical devices? So in Confinis, we have chosen to take an approach where we build competencies in clusters, and we have people attached to these clusters of competencies so that we can serve specific niches of clients with high expertise. So as you see, I am the current lead of the competence cluster in clinical evaluation, digital health, and active implantable medical devices. As you see, there is a transversal topic. There is a clinical evaluation, so how you assess that a device is safe and effective in different indications. And then there are two vertical topics: digital health, so anything that can relate to apps, AI, machine learning, any solution that is based on software, let's say, and quite modern. And active implantable medical device, we heard a lot in this summer school, so any device that is exchanging energy actively inside your body. So the goal of these teams and how we work is to complement teams that may lack or may need some input. We transfer the skills, we transfer the skills, and then we exit the company. So in general, we provide guidance and we try to contribute to innovation ecosystems in Switzerland. We are based in Switzerland. It's a great place to be because we have many important universities, and there are ecosystems of startups and entrepreneurs and investors that are willing to put big money into tech. So we try to also contribute with knowledge, know-how, trainings, and so on. So my personal history comes from brain technologies. I did a PhD at the PFL in Lausanne about brain-computer interfaces, non-invasive. We were using the EEG. When I joined this lab of Jose Milan, it was 2009, I started to develop these prototypes. Here you see a paralyzed person that is controlling a wheelchair with the imagination of hand movements, left and right, and it can navigate in a 2D space. This was an initial attempt to bring something nice. I mean, I was an engineer looking for some challenges. This was definitely a challenge because I entered a lab with prototypes on students, and I started to do the clinical test on this. So my story, my history, let's say, evolved into, I was not so keen of this solution of 2D navigation because severely locked-in patients and paralyzed patients, they don't care so much about moving into the like this. I mean, they have other issues that are very important for them, such as communication, for example. So I transferred this prototype into a context that was a bit more controlled. This is stroke rehabilitation. So the idea with the stroke rehabilitation prototype was to use the imagination of people to move their paralyzed limb. You see the cursor. Whenever we would detect the brain signature of an active engagement of the limb, we would deliver an electrical stimulation of the muscles to actually make the movement. This was a very nice study that demonstrated that when we test a population of stroke patients with this technique linked to the brain activity, and we compare it to an active sham population, meaning that the population is receiving all the same montage, the same stimulation, but it's not controlled through the brain, one group improves, the other group does not. So it's a strong demonstration that this brain activity is actually the key factor promoting the recovery. Now, you see that it took 5 years to publish this study because it was very new and very complex. It started in 2012. The final article came out in 2018, Nature Communication. It took a lot of time. During this time, I also started a company with another person, and the ambition of the company was to create a simple neurostimulation device non-invasive neurostimulation device for the arm for stroke patients. You see here a patient that's trying to reach for an object it doesn't manage, and through a simple object that it controls with the hand. So there's no brain interface here, just a simple neurostimulation in many sites. This person is able to complete real tasks and recover, so do therapy and recover. This was the intent of project. And what I would like to show you is that these two videos that you see on top are very high tech. They never became a product. This other approach that you see below, the guy moving the objects around, is now a commercial product. The company, we sold the company in 2017, and now it's a commercial product available for stroke patients. So you see that not necessarily, it's not necessarily simple to transfer the high-tech innovation into a successful product or a product that enters the market. And sometimes you need to be pragmatic on what you do. Now, one of the challenges I took is to now try to bridge and drive the EEG as a technique that can enter the mainstream in terms of large-scale recordings real world. So we have seen many talks about recordings of invasive recordings of electrodes, either from single cells or from populational cells. EEG is the recording of large populational cells, and it's not invasive. And it has been known for 100 years, and I think we heavily underestimated, and the new advances in machine learning can be very important for that. And this is leading to the two heads. I mean, that's an approach that I've been consistently using in my consulting life in the last 3 years, meaning that on one hand, I'm a classical industrial consultant, so I provide some guidance on specific topics like combination product, design control, the risk management, all the documentation you may imagine, up to verification tests and clinical evaluation. But on the other hand, I'm still a senior scientist. I mean, I keep 1 day per week to actually try to do some science or help groups that do science. This is, for example, one study that's ongoing where we demonstrated that using an approach that's very similar to clinical evaluation. I hope that people here from regulatory will appreciate this effort in academia. We reviewed all the single trial EEG studies, so electroencephalography studies published so far, and we demonstrate that basically more than 50% of these studies is not significant if you filter it with the proper statistical approach. And this, this type of research is showing what we can do when we collaborate with academia for the industry, because any future manufacturer of devices that will use this single trial, so try to decode what you do every time you try to do something with your brain, they can use this type of application to base and to make a benchmark analysis. And that's a type of interaction, so these two hats between being an industrial figure and being a scientist, an academic figure, can bring something new on the table, for the approach to the medical device regulation. So to make towards the conclusion of this talk, how do we go from great human research to great products? So my advice for scientists would be to be very careful what they do in terms of the data collection. So think ahead and plan ahead. Why do you need something, and how do you show that this is the actual adequate amount of evidence? The MDR is very clear on the fact that you can use data as long as the clinical trial followed harmonized standards. And the harmonized standards in this context can be very easily the ISO 14155, good clinical practice and clinical investigation, and the ISO 14971, risk management. So let's say that the advice would be to think ahead, really, which data do you know and how do you document what you're doing. And also I would strongly advise to ask for guidance. I mean, there are many people that can give you good hints with experience. Ask people that did it before, or ask people that are maybe willing to give you a free or a pro bono assistance. How do I make sure that this can turn out in a product, or that I can reuse the data? That's very important. So this is a graph that actually was also in the presentation from Martin, much more complex and detailed. This was an oversimplification to show you that a quality management system, according to the standard for medical device, is what waits for you on the other side of the barrier when you jump into the industry. And there are many procedures, standard operating procedures. Sometimes you will need to, you'll be asked to create a documentation about the implementation that you did. That's okay, a challenge, but quite easy to address. It's not so easy to address the clinical evaluation challenge. So here you are screening if the device is safe and effective, and in a systematic way, and this has an impact on the risk management, which risks are there for your device and how you manage them, and the post-market surveillance. So I would still suggest to find partners that understand your technology, that can give you guidance that is relevant for you. especially if you are still in academia and want to transition. So the take-home message for me is that it is possible to make great research that has big relevance for the industry, but always remember that in Europe now it's very important the processes that you need to apply. And I would suggest also that anyone interested in making research on humans deepens a bit their knowledge in regulatory affairs with reputable partners that can provide good trainings, good information. And I think notified bodies, they're very important, and you can find all the information there. Work with people that understand your technology. That's going to be very important if you want to have a common language. And for startuppers, I would also advise to always keep in mind what is the next step for you and how does what you're doing contribute to your growth and future life under any scenario. So thank you very much. I would like also to thank Martina Gosch, that helped us a lot these days, another consultant at Confinis, with the slides and with the material. Bear Stefan, our CEO, and Professor Megamari from TÜV in Lausanne for all the support for these studies. Thank you, and if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you also for putting together this panel, which is amazing value, at least for a scientist like me. I actually wanted to go back to a couple of slides ago. You went into this idea that, well, you should think ahead. What are the kind of small mistakes that to your experience caused the largest amount of work being lost in this process? Like, do you have some examples of how people really failed at doing that, so that we don't replicate these mistakes?
Yeah, so there are two mistakes, I would say. One is, two mistakes from the technical engineering standpoint and from the clinical standpoint. The technical engineering standpoint is that people do not document what they do as they do it. And I mean, this is very common in academia. You work with prototypes and you assemble it the night before running a test. And so while this can be an approach, let's call it lean, to go towards actually making it happen, on the other hand, it makes it very hard to trace back what you did and what changed. And when you join, let's say when you create a startup or you create a product and you need to document the design controls for FDA or for ISO 13485, then it becomes extremely hard to reconstruct what you did backwards. And most of the time you need to start from scratch, or you even lose more time than doing it. Definitely lose more time than doing it prospectively. So that's first mistake, very common. The second mistake is on clinical studies that are, so let's say there is a kind of tendency in academia to oversimplify or to facilitate the collection of data in pilot studies. And, but let's say this is good because it allows pilot studies to be published, but this is bad because it pushes researchers to be sloppy. And being a sloppy researcher in biostatistics and in the controls you make or in the design you make, because you want your effect, somehow you're a fan of your technology, you want your publication to be out and published. But this is very bad when it goes in the hands of a serious reviewer, because I mean, you will be surprised the profile of the reviewers you get in notified bodies. I mean, this was the biggest surprise for me, because I worked a lot in journals and I know the profile of reviewers in journals. And I was stunned to see the level of the reviewers in notified bodies. These are people that really know what they're doing, and they can challenge any aspect that doesn't work in your study, and they will go exactly to the point. So there's no way around. You need to make good statistics, power the study based on effect sizes that you estimate on good models, and then proceed with staging of studies, pilot, pivotal, and then post-market, eventually large scale. So that would be my main advice.
Thank you very much. Yes, actually, this is what I wanted, Francesco, to answer the question on the chat. This is actually what I wanted to suggest. That maybe what we can do right now is open with this question round to the round table, and go propose a question to everyone. And there is specifically, I mean, we can continue on this very question if Viky Verna or Martin Witte want to add on what Andrea just said.
I confirm that the level of knowledge in notified bodies, especially in the clinical department, is strong.
If I may, can I? Actually, I mean, you introduced already a matter that I wanted to ask, Andrea. You said it right. I mean, in research, people should do what you just said. However, when you go submit a paper, which is the final objective, if you want, of a researcher, you do not have any kind of constraints for the reviewer to check on GCP, GLP, good clinical practice, good laboratory practice, also for the students that are listening. So if there are not these constraints, how do you envision pushing this phenomenon that you're envisioning to move forward?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I think, so we had some scandals even recently on COVID, and that's a much bigger health issue on checking the data and checking that the data is actually available. And this shows that sometimes we work in a hurry. There is a push for publishing cool stories. That's, I mean, for editorial purposes, that is sometimes, let's say, blurring a bit the vision on the actual safety of what is proposed. But I also think that there are efforts in the going the right direction. For example, the new PubMed, which is the search database that is used, I think it provides a better way to screen for the data that is actually usable from the industry side. And in any case, I would say it's I mean, I wouldn't put it all on researchers. I mean, it's companies that need to push for finding good data and finding data that is relevant to the question that is asked. And I mean, you will always have, I think, researchers that don't do, a great job for you, but they're not supposed to do it for the industry. So yeah, that's my point of view.
I understand. Even though I really liked your point that you said that, if research did it this way, it would be easier for industry to use data to be faster for arriving to the market, because you guys have been describing to us a process that is excruciating for arriving to certification. So actually, this thing we're talking about, I left. It's exactly the same thing I talked about in a commentary to Nature Communications after the paper we published on the pilot trial, and this was exactly the matter: pushing research to do trials that are meaningful, not only statistically.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have a question from Leo. The question was originally formulated during the talk from Viky Verna, so I invite Viky to answer first. Leo?
Yes, thank you. Thank you all three for your talks. My question is, with regards to using AI algorithms to replace humans in narrow tasks, such as identifying cancers in scan images, as was mentioned, I wonder if an approval policy of such system would put a number on by how much the performance must be better as compared to human performance. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I don't think that this is the main objective. So basically, the goal is to try to see how to improve the safety and effectiveness of products by being able to leverage available technologies. So I'm not sure how to answer this question from that point of view. But if you're asking me, how can I imagine the usage of AI to improve healthcare or the effectiveness of medical devices, I can say that this is something that is definitely foreseeable, even when considering some of the conversations on the neuroprosthetics, and a lot of them also consider AI in their applications, right? So what is actually missing now is just the established framework to ensure that these type of technologies can be leveraged in a way that does not compromise the effectiveness and safety of these products.
Martin, would you want to add on this?
Well, I think it is it's very difficult for me to make clear statements there. But if you develop something like this, such an artificial intelligence or an algorithm that's supposed to be superior to human, then of course there is a question of validation of that, right? I mean, that's a fundamental question you have as a developer to answer. And now it's about your validation strategy. And if you have a group of, I don't know, 100 radiologists equipped all with the same equipment, and they are doing cancer screening on MRI images, and they have a 95% likelihood of finding the cancer, and your AI is 99.99%, then you're supposed you might be superior to human beings, but it's fundamentally in your responsibility to set up a validation strategy, plan, execute it, and show that your device, your AI is superior. If you do a device-device comparison, that very seldomly happens that one manufacturer states that they are superior to a different one. They all want to be the best in class, but they don't compare to others because you don't know what others might know. Yeah. So having these 100 radiologists, and it's just a number 100, might be a good approach, might be completely wrong. I don't know. And then a very common answer of a notified body, it depends.
Yeah. And I would quickly add to this, since we're talking about the human aspect, and that's why I was making that clarification that the goal should not necessarily be about whether it is better than humans, right? It's really about how can we improve healthcare by having better products out there. So whether we have 100 experts or 1 million experts, and they're able to put their minds together to make a diagnosis that is probably critical or something like this, but that's still effort that is being used by all of them, right? But if you can end up developing a product that can make these decisions faster, of course that's beneficial for healthcare in general. So now, what regulatory frameworks are doing now is like allowing these products to come out in a way where if healthcare professionals are going to rely on these products, that they can actually rely on them. That's why Martin was talking about the validation aspect, because once it's validated, then you can rely on it. Then those hundreds or 1,000 professionals can think about other stuff. And that's the main benefit.
Yeah, I also an additional point on this. I mean, I recently read this issue on Lancet Digital Health, a journal, to speak about that, on the fact that the EU is totally off course, and the regulatory framework for digital health is totally not there and not ready. So this was an editorial that they made at Lancet Digital Health, saying that it should be the academia driving this. But I still have one objection to that, which is, so one answer could be you see the state of the art set by academia and you use that, but then you would submit it to a notified body and the head of digital health would tell you, no, but this stuff sucks. I mean, it doesn't work that way. And they would tell it most likely because they would ask you a few questions and they would destroy the framework. The first question would be the one that Martin just mentioned. How do you power the study that you just showed? And so I think there is a problem in academia about the presumed positions due to history of being good in that field that is totally meaningless in the regulatory world. And so I think that the academia can play a very important role in defining these thresholds for performance. And this will be the case also for the IVDR when it will come into force. It can play a role as long as the researchers will do a nice job in disseminating the reason behind every choice in design, and the reason, I mean, making open research that can be reused also in the industry to set, for example, the sample sizes and the effect sizes and all this type of really basic research, but with the terminology that is usable also in the industry.
So I'm gonna actually, I know that Michael has a question, but I wanted to stay on the theme of performance, and I'm gonna go for a question more related to like invasive devices such as interfaces with the nervous system. So in terms of performance, when you're gonna go towards the end maybe of a patent, then you're gonna see like a situation of competition where you basically people are now allowed to enter, other companies might be allowed to enter the market, and now a field that is dominated by hardware improvements would try to see how you can provide an optimized technology through other paths. Now, if you want to add some software to that, for instance, like a program that can optimize your nervous stimulation, that is particularly complicated on multiple levels, also because it's difficult to patent. And then, well, you get in front of FDA with this idea, and then you're gonna have problems there. So what do you think should be in the future years when, you know, like a large mass of patents are gonna become available to take as a niche of market to multiple other companies? Yes, Viky Verna.
Yes, this is a great question, and I think this is what I kind of like triggered my presentation around when it comes to the current status. So I guess about 10 years ago when I was studying BCI, for example, this was just a science thing. Whereas now, if we're looking at some of the presentations during this conference, even, for example, the ones right before from Jesse, for example, you can tell the amount of advancement that has been occurring throughout the years, especially when we're considering having products coming out for being used. And this is where now agencies like the FDA are really finding the interest in basically merging with industry and academia to try to figure out how these need to be regulated, because just like you said, it's a very complicated process. A lot of different factors need to be taken into account and so forth. But now FDA, what they're trying to do now with the pre-cert program that I described is that they're trying to get these innovators, these scientists early on to try to understand more the variations and the fluctuations in the data that is being generated. So perhaps the current regulatory approach might not be applicable, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot develop different regulatory frameworks that can cover this. And right now, what is being considered based on the framework that FDA has issued is that they're considering a way to basically predict or predefine all of these variations that can occur. And if these variations can happen within an acceptable range, then they will be able to allow it to go in within that realm. So that's where like they just need to identify whether that realm is still within the purview of ensuring that the product will still remain effective and safe at the same time.
But you, Martin, mentioned that actually there might be a little bit of a difference in the way the European MDR tackles this sort of ranges of how similar it is with respect to previous data.
In terms of clinical, yes. So if you have a high-risk product, and you want to rely on clinical data from a competitor device, then that's not the approach you should take. I think, especially on the side of interaction between innovators and regulators, I think the US system is advanced to the European system. So honestly saying, I think we are trying to get contact to companies, but actually if you are a startup and you don't care about notified bodies, it's like, yeah, why should I contact one? Yeah. So I think there the US system is advanced to the European one. And that's also the reason why this often becomes state of the art. Yeah, I mean, when we talk about cybersecurity, for example, what FDA was doing there, lately is easily becoming state of the art, which we then use because it's publicly available, it's knowledge that's there, and it's just on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. It's just, yeah, it's well-known knowledge. You can use it. And yeah, it's the setup. Yeah, I can't give too much guidance. I can't give any guidance. And so exchange between innovators and notified bodies is really limited. And the EU Commission, I mean, I was surprised about some things coming up, but yeah, don't want to talk too bad about them.
Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, I think they said it all. And I mean, if you speak about patents and technology, let's say orphan technology, that is, I think we need to, I had a discussion today with Stani. I think Stani's not here. Is Stani here? No. About, I mean, we talk about this, you know, great neurostimulation companies, make people walk, make people use their hands. But I mean, there are many stories that are quite scary, quite dangerous, because it's good to look at technology. Okay, I can do something nice. I can make new recordings of data, but why don't we focus a bit more, also in academia, about seeing what went wrong with other companies? What were the big problems that happened? What was the follow-up 20 years ago of companies that failed during the startup bubble or the IT bubble in early 2000, for example? This is a Neuroprosthetics conference. There was a company in the US called Neurocontrol Corporation. Probably Martin knows about this name. And I mean, this company did a great job with an implanted neurostimulation device for the upper limb restoration control with a joystick on the other side that could control the upper limb. It's a fantastic technology. It worked very well. The patents look like science fiction if you look for them even now. Nevertheless, they failed. And they failed after implanting, I think, 300 people. And they left these people. So there is an article that you can see on MIT Review from 2015. It's called Paralyzed Again. So it was one of these tetraplegic that was implanted. We recovered the function of the hand. He became became an employee of this company going around to make demos. And then the company bankrupt because of the burst of this bubble. And he was left without maintenance until this system broke. And so he was paralyzed again. And I think it was a set of engineers in the US that worked in Neurocontrol that started to work around, travel around the country to fix these people and repair with spare parts. And this is the type of history that I think is very relevant for translation of technology, because we need to avoid that again.
It's actually a very interesting anecdote. And with that, I want to pass the microphone to Michael, who has a question.
Yes, thank you again for all the very interesting talks. My question is more, each of you spoke about the general process to go about obtaining regulatory confirmation or so on. But I was wondering if you had any concrete examples for how companies actually dealt with doing regulatory affairs and regulatory bodies. Is there a team, a specialized individual, or so on?
Should I start? Oh, Vicky, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you could quickly repeat the question. I think I missed a part of it.
My question is just, are you able to give any concrete examples of how companies typically deal with regulatory bodies and regulatory affairs? Like if there's a team or a specialized individual or something like that.
Yeah, what's on the side of the company when faces this side?
So if you want, I can open the dances. So basically, it depends on many. It depends. I use the notified body approach. It depends on the size of the company. Which, I mean, in certain situations, you have an entire department of regulatory affairs. In research, I think there is an excessive attention to the R&D, which is just one of the functions, but there are many others that are as important. So, but you can imagine that there is a single person in a room that is filing piles of papers and interacting with notified bodies. It depends a lot on which legislation you work. So if it's in Europe, depending on the class of your device, this depends on which device you want to put in the market, what is the indication of that. And when you know about these things and you have a prototype that is quite developed and you start to have a quality management system in place, at that point is when you start to ask yourself what is the best entity that can assist me in the regulatory process. Then it depends on the country. In Europe, you would contact a notified body. while in the US you would start discussing with the FDA, that is a federal agency. So this is how you would interact with them. And then there are several iterations of discussion with them where you have to submit certain documents or you just receive audits and certifications of certain standards. I'm sorry, this was a super cut, but yeah, I hope I didn't insult the field.
So as I worked on the other side of the table, also in industry, what I've seen often in manufacturers of high-risk devices is that, for example, regulatory and quality is split. Yeah. What I see very often in low-risk devices is that regulatory is part of quality. The bigger the company, the more people work in regulatory, the higher the risk of the devices, the more people work in regulatory. So for a class 3 manufacturer, it might be that, I don't know, 1% of their yearly budget is spent for regulatory activities, and that results in a certain amount of people who need to deal with that. Interestingly, there is a huge difference in between manufacturers. And in my mind, there is a difference in US-based, Europe-based approaches. And that's interesting to me. But I only have this very narrow view. So I worked in projects right from the beginning of the idea till the end. So I was actually there when the idea was born and brought the baby to regulatory and then to the market. And the involvement of the regulatory affairs manager in the company I worked for was super extreme. So we were involved in everything. In other companies, it's a bit different, that regulatory is more at the end of the food chain and takes what was prepared before, but doesn't really influence or decide or give hints. Yeah, that's the two setups I've seen so far.
Vicky.
I think my comments would be along the same as Andrea and Martin. So the response is it depends on the size of the company, the preference, the culture of the companies. But if you ask me like what my preference is, what my recommendations would be, I would say to get regulatory folks early on, because I think most of the time their values underestimated, not only for the regulatory need, but even when we're considering process development, manufacturing development, even starting from the product development, it becomes very useful, because when you think about it, most of the design and development regulations are sometimes or most often in your favor. So if you are a startup and then you're developing your product without any structure, that's fine, right? But if you actually follow the processes that the regulations ask for, I'm pretty sure you might end up being more successful at what you're developing, because they're usually based off of great design thinking principles, like great internationally based principles and so forth. That's why now you're talking about human factors, usability studies, everything that takes into account the user, not just from a technical standpoint, which is all of the great things that you need, not just to be able to be compliant, but to have a great product. So that would be my feedback when it comes to having a regulatory team, whether it's in a small company or a big company.
And let's take this this question from the public, which is a little bit more about career. How do you transition from research and innovation to regulatory affairs? Martin, I see you smiling.
You send an application to a notified body and then you get hired. No, I mean you need to have some experience, of course. Yeah, I mean, for us, for example, for my team, yeah, I've a couple of people working in my team, and when I have a new position open for active medical implants, I would look at like 4 years of experience in a manufacturer, either in the research and design and development, or even in regulatory. And you need to be clever and a nice guy, because I want to work with nice people. That's it.
Vicky, you're laughing, but I guess you agree with what Martin said.
Yes, no, I definitely agree. If anything, I would say that the path is much clearer today than 15 years ago, for sure. 15 years ago, no one was talking about regulatory affairs. Whereas now you find, for example, these type of platforms where regulatory folks are being considered, so that already gives additional exposure. For example, when I, in one of the programs that I was in maybe 12 years ago or so, when I graduated with a regulatory certificate, there were probably 4 people in my program in a major university. So that shows you how it grew. Whereas now you will find in Europe, there's a TOPRA for regulatory affairs in Europe. There's RAPS in the US that also expands in the US. There are a lot of different organizations that are heavily involved in developing and promoting the regulatory field. So if you're interested in that field, feel free to join any of these organizations and you will start knowing more about the challenges. And when looking into the future, I would say that regulatory affairs is going to become more and more of a need, especially in Europe with the medical device regulations that's happening. Even the notified bodies right now are having a shortage of experts and so forth. So there's a need in both government side, notified body side, industry side to meet those needs. And then the regulatory, I would not say the regulatory burden, but the amount of documentation and preparation is also increasing as we are getting to understand technologies and products better.
This makes me think, actually, you mentioned that in your path, that was actually pretty clear, and you have selected a kind of education that will lead you to that. But considering that there is this shortage, are actually these companies sort of providing the formation to the role that you're gonna take? Like, what if you are a scientist that actually got in love with the industry, but on the side of regulation? Can you do the transition?
Yes, and if anything, the more that you're an expert in a topic, the better of a regulatory expert you can be, because then you can understand the technologies even better. Like, you can know the regulations, like you can be a lawyer, right? But if you are not an expert in any type of topic, then you're just a generic lawyer. But if you're a regulatory professional and you know the science behind the regulations, you become an even better regulatory expert. So that transition is actually, I would say, encouraged, if anything.
Yeah, I totally agree. So in my university years, I did a lot on MRI scanners and on imaging systems. And then in my regulatory life, I was responsible for MR conditional pacemakers. So I knew the technology MRI, I knew the technology pacemaker, so I was able to combine it. And there were not too many people, so I was responsible for that topic. And yeah.
And Andrea, it's a little bit more towards consulting. Do you want to have a little note on?
Well, I kind of have also the experience from that probably is what is missing in this big picture, which is the startup. So I think that when you work in high innovation and you make nice clinical studies, for example, you manage to reach the first in man, you can also think, and now there's a big push worldwide to try to start your own company or try to work around it. And even if the majority doesn't succeed, I'm sorry to say, but that's statistics. I think it's still a great learning experience that can give you that experience, those famous 4 years that Martin needs to hire. And I mean, especially if you start from scratch, you build from scratch, you get trained, you work like hell, and because I mean, we do when we are in startups, you do a good job and you manage to reach a certification, for example. That's an excellent value also for your future job, because you have seen really from scratch, and you have a longitudinal overview of what quality means, what it is, and then what the regulatory affairs are for bringing a device into market. So that's for me one very important path that researchers and PhDs can think, either to start themselves, but not everyone is an entrepreneur, or to join someone that is trying. And I think it's a very engaging and stimulating experience to really devote yourself into a startup, to learn so much, to do so much. Then complemented with some formal training. That's also the advice.
And so I want actually to try to ask a question that would a little bit sum up the debate that we had. And so I would like you to think of one of the students, say last year PhD student, and she actually has started smelling the fact that her idea could actually make a dent and could become something that could change the life of people. She could start doing a postdoc about that. And she thinks that what she wants to do is actually bring this idea to the market. So now she's in the best possible situation to build up towards like the most successful path, because everything is a white piece of paper. What is the kind of recipe that she should look for in order to get successfully to the moment in which she can finally test this on a patient, for instance? Is that
honestly, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't be able to answer that, Andrea. Maybe you.
I mean, that's it depends. No, but so the situation is that there's a person with a bright idea that is considering devoting her life to trying to make this happen into a product. Yeah, I mean, it depends on your motivation, first of all, and the environment you're in. I mean, that's very important also around you. Who do you have around you? Do you have an ecosystem that is very friendly to the idea, to translate ideas, to give you the trainings that you need to understand the burden of it? Do you have other people that manage around you, can give you some guidance and grandfathering? So I think that this is, it doesn't only depend on the exceptionality of this individual. I believe it depends on the ecosystem around the individual, on the facilitation that this person gets. Yeah, so that's what I would ask. What I would suggest is to go and reach out for people and ask. Speak to them, speak to people that have done it before, get feedback, and that's the human factor in the end there. That is I mean, you can have a great technology, but if you don't have a great human that is wanting to push it, I don't think you would manage.
But at what point of her research would she need actually to, like she would need not to fail in taking into account what are the regulation steps that she has to perform in order to be able at a certain point to, like I'm saying, say at the level of preclinical trials, for instance, or in, getting to a large animal. So at that point, what are the kind of things that even if you say, well, I still don't know whether I can go very far and into like business with this, but there are some things that I cannot miss to do right now if I don't want to lose the chance. Vicky?
Yeah. So actually, I think this is a situation that most startups are facing. This is a very common question, actually. Okay, so there are two ways to answer this question. There's like, what is the regulations or the agencies are expecting? And then there's like, what is practically feasible, right? So from a regulation standpoint, when we're thinking about the regulations, I don't know if you know the regulations too much, but there's something called the design controls process. These are expected to be ready when you have a finalized pilot version of your product, right? But you could be doing this while you're still doing development, so it doesn't necessarily answer much. But so from a regulatory standpoint, FDA is probably not gonna give you any issues and so forth. But just like you said, if it is in a situation where you're starting to get ready to get into clinical trials, what FDA is gonna care about is that that you have at least enough documentation that can prove that the product is safe enough to get into market. And that's where you're talking about your IRBs and so forth, right? So in that instance, there's basically or technically no real way to really prove that your product is safe without necessarily having some type of structure and some type of documentation. So technically you're starting to get into that, you know, the entrance of the regulatory needs. But then you mentioned even before clinical trials, you're talking about animal studies. So technically you can do animal studies before you have to think about any regulation implications. But whether it is the best approach or not may be dependent on how complicated your situation is. So this is where now in some of my slides, you're going to realize where I mentioned that I strongly recommend to have conversations with the regulatory bodies early on, especially if you're dealing with a novel product. So it's not required, but probably advised, because you can have your animal studies performed, but if they're not really going to substantiate your product or your evidence to prove the safety, for example, maybe you just wasted your time, or maybe it's not sufficient, and then now you're going to have to repeat something. So it's more from the practical standpoint, having it as early as possible could be in your benefit, at least having some type of conversation.
Thank you very much. It was very exhaustive. You wanted to add something, Martin or Andrea? Andrea, do you want to do a final address to conclude the panel?
Ciao. No, so I would like to thank you everyone for, first of all, the organizers of this event. I think it's a very nice event where we heard from companies, great people, notified bodies, former FDA investigator, I mean, consultants. So we heard a bit of everything, and I think it's a great service for the community, and this community in particular, for the young people. I'm very happy that we managed to be there. I thank a lot all the people that I know personally, so like Martin interrupted his vacation for us, so thank you very much for this. Viky also, he's working on some projects on the other side of the ocean, so thank you for doing this now with us. So it's very nice, and this shows that, I mean, I think there is something humanly very nice that we need to always invest on. That's the most important part. And yeah, so I think the future is bright, and let's make it even greater.
So thank you very much to our panelists, Viky Verna, Martin Witte, and Andrea Biasiucci. Thank you, Andrea, for organizing this panel for us.